magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hi, Magic in the Room listeners. This is Ben, the producer here at the podcast. Today, we are continuing our conversation with Nicole about self-care and well-being. The episode starts with Nicole leading Hannah and Luke through a short exercise to demonstrate the idea of embodiment that we talked about last week. If you have not listened to episode 171, it may be helpful to listen to it first. I'll hand it over to Nicole now to get the episode started.
I just want to start with the intention. And so, Luke and Hannah, tell me right now in this space, do you feel like you need a little bit of fueling up or powering down a little bit, becoming more grounded and more set in our space as we start co-creating this conversation?
I need powering down because
powering down.
I'm fueled by caffeine today, and it's a Friday, and I have all the things that I haven't been able to do because I've been in meetings all week or on site with clients or whatever. And so I'm like totally in this sprint. This is my normal Friday afternoon thing, like sprint and get all the tasks done so I can be done for the evening. So I need to power down maybe a little bit and be more present. That's me.
Okay. Hannah, would that work for you?
That will work for me. I was going to say the opposite because I'm feeling what Luke's feeling. I've got the caffeine and I have a long list in my head of things to get done. And my instinct says, I got to keep powering up and powering through so I can get through all my long lists and continue doing that into the weekend. So I'm going to take that as an invitation to not follow my natural inclination here and power down and ground into this moment and be present.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that we are going to take this large, expansive, big piece that we have, and we're just going to bring it in and contain it for the next hour. So go ahead and just place both feet on the ground. And I invite you to close your eyes if that feels great. If you are listening to this and driving your car, you might want to keep your eyes at a soft gaze. So just taking a minute to land. Noticing the temperature of the air in the room on your skin. Noticing if your breath is shallow or deep. And then go ahead and take a deep inhale. And exhale. If you have a favorite breathwork practice, you're invited to do that now. Or one that is super simple that I love is just equal parts breath. So inhaling for 3. And exhaling for 3. And then perhaps inhaling for 5. And exhaling for 5. And just find your own rhythm. There's no right or wrong. We're just simply bringing awareness to our current state of being. By doing this, we're giving gratitude to all 72 trillion cells in our body. We're letting know that we see them and appreciate them, and for all the work that they do every day so that we're able to support clients and family members, communities, through the space of coming home, that we're able to radically serve in a different way. So just continuing to stay with your breath for 2 more rounds. And just beginning to wiggle your fingers and your toes. Gently open your eyes. Just honoring that 3-minute practice of landing. So many times, in the morning, sometimes we talk about the way you start your day is the way you live your day. And most of us start our day with an alarm, a resounding alarm, wake up, wake up. And so you're immediately jostled into this new state of being. And then while we have our phone in our hand, we're also like, oh, what was happening on the internet while we were sleeping last night? And then we just kind of fall into our day. And so many practices of well-being really start by taking the pause, just taking a few minutes to either offer gratitude or sit in silence, conscious awareness of, how do I want to enter this time? How do I want to enter this day? A lot like what we just said before we enter this conversation. Like, how do we want to show up for each other? So thank you for helping us activate in a way that felt really, really healthy and settled.
Well, thank you for that practice.
How do you feel after doing
I feel
that?
great. And with that, I want to welcome everyone to Magic in the Room. I am Hannah Broderud.
And I feel great too. And I'm Luke Freeman. And what a great way to start today's podcast with our good friend and teammate, Nicole Casey, who's here to help us think about wellness. I'll let you define how, but for me, it's from a mind-body perspective. How do we move forward in a way that's sustainable and use some practices to do that? I know that was a little bit different way to start the podcast, but Nicole, thank you for prompting us to actually practice here some wellness and mindfulness practices as we jump into this. So for everyone, just a reminder, this whole season is about intentional leadership. We've talked about clarifying our own values, clarifying our own vision, learning about our strengths. We've talked about managing our own stress and really how do we become more intentional in managing the leadership journeys that we're all on? How do we notice where we are in our journey? How do we become more conscious about the choices we're making and ultimately do good things, make the world a better place? We all have the ability, and some would say, some being me, the responsibility to continue on that journey as we go forward. So this month is about well-being. Today, we're going to lean into well-being with Nicole, but a reminder that there is a free guide on well-being. It has some reflection questions to help you increase your own levels of well-being, and that's at magicintheroom.com. So super excited to dig into it today.
Nicole, I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. And for those of you who don't know Nicole, you're going to get to know her in our conversation today. But Nicole is she's an amazing teammate. She's a wonderful friend and teacher of well-being practices. She demonstrates for our team and helps all of us connect in a different way, first with ourselves and the moment that we're in, and also with each other and the team. And our client partners. And many of you have interacted with Nicole. If you have had anything to do with purpose and performance group, chances are you may have had conversation with Nicole, met her at an event. And Luke and I were fortunate to be able to spend a week with Nicole in person just the week before our recording this, where Nicole hosted a really amazing session on well-being for a conference that we attended. And really there was this focus on the power of you and powering up or fueling up or powering down, and very similar to what we just did. Nicole kind of walked the audience through that sense of connecting with self in the moment. So thank you, Nicole, for being that person on our team. What led you to this focus on well-being, Nicole? Like, what is a little bit of your background and what brought you to this moment?
Yeah. What brought me to this moment? I remember being a young mom of 3 and realizing that the current state of being that I was in was not sustainable, and that I was trying to make it look fabulous on the outside. It was all performance-based. I was doing the checklist, my kids were awesome and everything from the outside looked amazing. And there was this piece on the inside that was yearning for something different. And I think it was this yearning for permission granted to do it different. I grew up in a very large family, where service and faith were top priority. And I also took on that role of serving constantly at a very high level. And my mom and dad, if you know my parents, my mom and dad made it look really easy. And as I became a parent myself, was in so many ways trying to live up to certain expectations, but found that, the way that I was doing it was not sustainable or healthy. And I remember sharing with my grandmother this place that I was in, and she offered me permission to explore what doing it different would really look like. And I remember that was just like the check mark. And so I immediately started Googling women's wellness, because it has to be more than just OBGYN. There has to be this larger space of how do I honor myself so that I can honor others. And really, that's where the story for me really began. I matched up with an amazing mentor who's an author and international speaker, Renee Trudeau. And I applied to be a part of her retreat team and on staff with her, and was able to really start stepping into what this new way of being might look like. And at the time, I was really looking for the magic potion. I wanted the smoothie that I could drink, or, the supplement that I could take, and that everything would just, everything would be much better. And I ran out. Someone had shared about her book, and I ran out and I got the book, The Mother's Guide to Self-Renewal, that I became very, very important to my space. And I remember reading it front to back and just sobbing the first time. And I cried and I cried and I cried, thinking, wait, I thought it was going to be my magic potion. And it wasn't. That night, I still was crying and crying and crying. And then I went back. I remember it so clearly. I went back and I opened it again. And it's chapter 1, month 1. And then chapter 2, month 2. Chapter 3, month 3. That we weren't talking about having this these words that would just land in our head and that we would just move on. It was about learning a new way, seeing it modeled, and then coming to the heart space and practicing it and really defining this integration. What would it look like if? And so that just opened up a whole world of curiosity and possibility. What if it could look different? What if I could take care of myself and be an amazing mother? And what if the other mom in PTA sitting next to me wasn't judging me for that? What if, things were falling apart and they were also really amazing? And that's kind of where I started the practice of, what if many things could be true at once? What if this physical sense of embodied space allowed me to hold both joy and its opposite? And am I strong enough? The question in the beginning was, am I strong enough to do this? And over the last 12 years, we've been able to lead retreats together and really take on a role of, how do I support her? And through supporting her, how do I support all the women in the room? And how do we just invite in different ways? Because there's not the magic potion, and there's there are hundreds of thousands of books out there, right? But at the end of the day, I feel like you have to come home to what feels right for you. And how do we use that as a superpower to serve others?
Yeah. So love that kind of origin story, because what I hear in that, and also like why we're spending a month on well-being as we talk about intentional leadership this season, is this idea of sustainability. And what I hear you saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you felt like you were in a place with the roles and the service that you were providing to others that became unsustainable the way that you were doing it. And I know for me, as I try and continue to develop as a leader, like I'm probably driven by the impact that I want to have in others' lives, like much more than my own satisfaction or my own, what I want to have happen. And I don't say that in like that's the right way to do it. I think in a lot of ways that's a fault and can be a fault. But for me, to have a sustainable impact in the lives of others, I have had to learn some of these well-being practices. And so for folks listening, I would love to hear some of your thoughts on that, Nicole. How do we think about sustainability and being able to have extended impact? And maybe what is the outcome of you kind of going on this journey of well-being been to your own sustainable practices as a leader or sustainable impact?
Yeah. I started looking at it from 4 pieces: spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. And just learning how to, with no judgment, take current inventory of where I am. So, like, honesty and trust with myself, and trying to build a kinder, gentler, sweeter way of being with my own wisdom. And through that own wisdom, really knowing how and how much I can serve and to what degree. I think so many times we have that. Sometimes it's a gut feeling or that little voice, and sometimes it's a whisper until we have more intimate conversations with the whisper, right? And then sometimes if we don't listen to the whisper, it gets louder and louder and louder. I'm thinking of sometimes how easy it is to say yes. I'm a yes person, right? Someone says, do you want to do this? Yes. Do you want to do this? Yes. Do you want to do this, this, and this? Yes, yes, yes. And for me, it's bringing it back down to like what is most important right now, and where am I? Where's my scale? How much do I have? And are these things that are feeding me or are depleting me? And being really, really mindful about what I say yes to, and that it's okay to say no. How is my emotional state of being? Where am I at with these 4 things? And what's needed most at this stage of my life to get where I really want to go? Yeah.
So, Nicole, you obviously have had this 12-year journey of discovering, learning, practicing, and teaching and guiding others into higher states of well-being. And yeah, what in your mind, when we talk about well-being, what is it? And maybe what is it not? And I think we often have we get ideas that pop into our heads when we hear certain words, right? And we've talked already a little bit about well-being on this podcast, and we talked about it as just kind of the state of being well. But what does that mean to you? And what does it not mean?
When I think of well-being, I think of really that, like the glass of water, how full is my cup? Is my energy balanced? Is what I'm giving out coming back in? And how am I fueling myself? What does that look like? And at times when I'm depleted, there's a disconnect. Like I find myself to be, as my kids would say, a little crunchy. I don't have as much patience. I can become resentful. And so when I think of well-being, it's so closely for me connected to how is my relationship with myself right now. And, do I have my own back? It's a deep, deep level of I care enough about myself and others to know that I'm really tired right now. And instead of having some type of outburst, I'm going to go take a 15-minute nap and close my eyes for a second. Or I'm not going to engage in this conversation right now because I am not at my highest and best. I can recognize that within myself. And so when I think of self-care, we talk a lot about it as being just the art and science of listening to my wisest self and my needs and desires moment to moment, so that I can then internalize that and serve others in a much more powerful way. When I think of well-being, do I have enough to give? And so many of us are trying to give from a 10% mark. And something that kind of comes into play for well-being is, what types of food am I digesting? What kind of music am I digesting? What kind of television? Is it something that's feeding me and nourishing me? Or do I get finished and I'm contracted and I'm, having a lot of dis-ease? We talk a lot about it, about having a picture of our little selves on our desk, just as a reminder of, we wouldn't deny her of lunch because I've got to get that email out or I've got to do XYZ. I would never deny her of grabbing a glass of water or taking a minute to take a deep breath. So why would I do the same thing for myself? Can I be kinder and sweeter with myself and know that, go get a glass of water. You're going to feel radically different. And so many times I think self-care gets wrapped up with maybe manicures or retail therapy or something maybe only privileged people have the opportunity to have. And I do want to say that, when I started this, like these things that are really honestly fill your cup, are free. Like, they don't cost money. They do cost time, and you do have to feel worthy of going out and grabbing that glass of water real quick, or making yourself a lunch that is decadent and really vibrant and nourishing to your body. But yeah, just really taking on, what is my experience? Is this fueling me? With each experience, is it fueling me or defeating me?
I love that. And you brought up the word self-care, and I think it's gotten a little bit of a bad reputation for some of the reasons that you described. And I think it's helpful to think about self-care is in this way of taking care of myself. And that starts by making myself a priority and recognizing that I am someone who's worthy of being taken care of. And for those of you listening, if you didn't see when Nicole was talking about the picture of your younger self, she is literally showing a picture of herself as a little girl. Love that picture, Nicole. And that practice of keeping that reminder of her on your desk. I thought that was really, I'm going to have to think about that. Maybe I could do something similar, but looking at the young child version of you, literally reminding yourself of, what does this person need? What does this child, this little individual need if I'm responsible for taking care of her or for taking care of him? However we identify, but that reminder of, yes, we were once and we still are that person who deserves love and care, and who deserves to be well. So what does that person need? I love that. Thank you.
I'm thinking of like different ways that are super simple, but it's, in between Zoom meetings, taking my shoes off real quick and running to the backyard and just putting my feet on the grass and being outside, letting the sun just, filter into your skin for, even if it's just for 2 seconds, being outside or taking a walk around the neighborhood in between calls, so that you feel nourished when you hop and present when you're hopping on your next piece of work.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak for maybe some listeners who are like, I don't get this. So I'm going to offer a critique, and I'd like to hear your response. And this could be for either of you. So say for most of human history, like, people don't get to run around with full glasses. Like, the energy glass gets really low sometimes, and then it gets full other times. And it feels to me like there are many times that I just have to get things done. And when I think about like the self-care world and messages that maybe I see on TV, or that, in conversations or whatever, I get this sense that like just getting things done sometimes and experiencing pain is a negative, when in reality, I think it's, for me, like, I think pain is part of the human condition, and that actually is pretty psychologically harmful for us if we try to avoid pain, and try to avoid kind of the normal downs that come with life. And even this, idea of caring for a child. Like, I've got 3 boys, and I want them to miss meals sometimes. Like, that might sound really mean. And when they were little, I probably took better care of them. But right now, if I see them taking a long break while they're mowing the yard, and I'm just like, you should be able to suffer a little bit more than you're suffering. you should be able to push a little bit harder because you are taking your foot off the gas earlier than I think would be healthy for you to be able to keep moving through this. So I think there's probably some listeners that have some similar perspectives. So I would just love, like, how's that strike you? Like, what do you think about that? Or am I hearing you wrong about some of these things?
I love that, Luke, because you kind of offered like my early story, right? So I'm the oldest of 4 daughters. And the role that I played growing up was high achiever, nurturer. Like I don't know if my parents wanted me to take on that role, or it was just something that kind of came naturally, and it was go, go, go. I was like the other parents sometimes. There's 5 years between me and my next sister, and they're all 2 years apart. So it was like, Nicole, can you go grab the kids, or da da da? Like there was always something else that needed to be done. We grew up on a small farm. So like I just had a conversation with my dad, like stuff is never finished here. And sometimes there just was that continuation of that in my adult life. And it was about doing. And I had somehow in my personal relationship, I started looking at achieving and being visible as doing. So when I was a high performer, when I had this going and I was like working at the edge all the time, I was visible and I got seen. So if I was, I was a dancer growing up. So, when I was on stage and offering a big performance, we worked really, really hard. You couldn't slack. There was always the next level that you needed to be at. And that type of level up long-term for me is what created the crash. And when I crashed, I knew that I had to somehow redefine who I was, and that I could be a high performer and meditate, or I could work really, really hard for a long period of time on a big project and then offer myself some rest. Or I could, and now I look at it differently. So if we have a large project, I'm like, oh yeah, how do I build in rest? I'm going to have to be going at this for a really, really long time. How do I build in rest? How do I build in deep connection with those who like really, really stoke my fire and build me up so that I can have this, sustained peace? Otherwise, I get to the end of the project, and my husband doesn't even want to be around me. Or, I just got back from 2.5 weeks of travel, and I kind of came in and I face planted, and he was like, I'm so excited to see you. And I was like, too. And I am so tired. I am completely depleted. So I think this idea, we think that it should look the same for everyone, and it just doesn't. It goes back to, what do I need right now? And let me tell you, it doesn't mean that there aren't days that I'm not completely lazy. I don't feel like getting up and working on that piece that I know has a deadline on Friday. It's still there. It's very much there. But at that moment, what I really need is to get my butt up and get inspired. I need to power up. So what does that look like? That means, getting a great breakfast first thing, getting energy. Maybe it's doing some movement, taking a long walk or a yoga class before I get started. Like, how do I really amp up my mind and body so that I can show up 100% to get this done? And I'm silly. I'm like, and what's the reward going to be when I get it done? So once I get it done, maybe, I'm, planning a date with my husband, or, we have some type of like, if I get this nailed, like, how do we celebrate? How do we move this forward? So it just depends. And then at other times, for people who have been working at their edge their whole life, like self-care can be really scary. It can feel like things are falling apart to slow down. It might feel like you're suddenly becoming irrelevant or losing positioning. And it's in those states that you go back to, like, what do I need? And it's okay. Permission granted to like ramp it up when you need to ramp it up and to bring it down when you have to bring it down.
I love that. And that's, that I think what is for me, what was so powerful when I had a chance to be part of the workshop that you did that I mentioned earlier, because I think, Luke, to your point, both perspectives are true. Yes, there are times that we need to fuel up and we need to power through and get things done, and maybe for a time move through pain in order to get to a point where we've accomplished something, achieved something, whatever it is, right? No great accomplishment happens without a certain level of discomfort, of pain, of uncertainty, any of those things, right? And it's also true that when we ignore the signals that our body and our mind sends us over time, right? Pain is a signpost. It says, pay attention. There's something going on here. And if we ignore that for a long time and we numb it with whatever escape or substance, and we are not paying attention to what it's telling us, we can cause a lot of harm and damage. You mentioned, psychological damage of avoiding all pain or seeking an existence that is void of discomfort or suffering. And the opposite is also true. Like, feeling that and not stopping and paying attention is also harmful. So this is, Nicole, I think what I am continuing to learn from you is this concept of embodiment. Like, how do we know, and what signs do we need to pay attention to? And where do we, is there balance? Is balance even a thing? Like, how do I know when it's time to just keep going and when it's time to stop and take a moment?
Yeah. Balance has been the trickiest word out there for me. And I now look at it as kind of slimy. It's not one of my favorite words because, when I was that young mom that I shared in the story earlier, I thought, I'll get to have this deep breath when, and when I find balance, everything will be joyful, everything will be great. And, the unicorns and rainbows life that Nicole has always wanted to live. And it became, talk about high performing and my desire to always be there. It became the next thing that was dangling the carrot in front of me. Well, if I could only, meditate 3 times a day and do yoga twice a week and add that extra thing to my to-do list that would create more calm in the chaos, then I could land on balance and then everything would be okay. If I could only remove this project, and this project, then I'll land at balance and everything will be okay. And I'm here to demystify that completely. Like, I have so yearned over the years to land, but you do land and you get glimmers. We call them blissings or glimmerings of just really relishing in the moment but you also don't want to stay there. Like Luke said, then you're going to continue to grow, which means more discomfort. And then you'll find the new thing. And then the carrot just continues dangling. So I kind of like to just remove the idea of balance and come back to embodiment, right? The body lets us know. I mean, I love this. There's a quote by Dr. Claudia Welch that says, when we're tired, we think something's wrong. Nothing's wrong. You're just tired and you need rest. Sometimes lots of rest if you've gone for years vetoing your body's requests and signals. And like sometimes you just need to like let it all go, rest and come home so that you can power up for the next big thing. And, that discernment between when do I fuel up and when do I power down is what I am most curious about at this stage. And it really, every time I am trying to figure out what I need, it's like, oh, my husband can't tell me what I need, or Luke and Hannah can't offer that. I have to be honest with myself and say, this is the type of support that I need to offer myself. These are the other things that I need to ask. I might need to ask a friend or a coach or a mentor, or a colleague for just, some input, some wisdom sharing. But yeah, that balance word is tricky.
Yeah. So you've mentioned the word embodiment a couple of times, and we've had Lorca Smetana on the podcast who talks about checking in below the neck. And so for me, that has become this reoccurring phrase that helps me think about what embodiment is. We tend to spend so much time above the neck in our heads, many of us do, that we have like very little awareness of what's actually going on below the neck. And so, Nicole, for listeners who are not maybe as attuned to their bodies, their physical body and what it is telling them, what do you mean by embodiment and how do you check in? How do you do that? Like, how do you create that and build that awareness?
Yeah. My mind goes into 8 different directions. So I'm going to anchor and pull in. And I just want to preface that with my practice now, 12 years later, looks radically different than it did when I first started. When I first started, and if you would have looked at my battery charge, I was at 5%. And I was trying to offer 100%. I thought I was offering 100%. And I was offering 100% of my 5%, right? And, I went on this retreat and the facilitator asked us to do a check-in. And we journaled about our check-in, what do we need? What do we want? How are we feeling? What is that experience? And after journaling for 15 minutes, my page was blank. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I needed. I just sat there with the discomfort, right? And there are beautiful women around the room and they were sharing what they needed and articulating it with poise and power. And it was my first time like witnessing embodiment, because it was a check-in, it was a tuning, and then hearing. It was, and there, it's going in many different directions as I'm saying it, but it's the notice, choose, act of intentional leadership. Noticing where we are, choosing to listen to that inner voice that we we may or may not have a relationship with in the beginning, and then acting on what wisdom that you're getting. And so if you don't hear it immediately, if you do a 15-minute meditation and you're asking yourself what you want and you don't get the resounding, you're dehydrated, you need a glass of water, or you're tired, you need to rest, or you need to go for a run. If you don't get that loud and clear, don't abandon it. Go back and do it again and start building in time to have that sweet relationship, because over time, that voice will become more powerful and more present. And that's how that wise connection is what I think of when I hear embodiment. So, the things that I do to recognize when I'm embodied and when I'm not, or I'll come back home to I put one hand on my chest and one hand on my belly, where I just sit with my breath for a second. And sometimes if I haven't checked in a little while, the tears will come. It's like my little inside self, my gut and my heart, everything below the neck says, oh my gosh, you see me. Oh my gosh, she's here. She's asking me how I'm doing. And if you've ever witnessed like being with children, that when you check in with a child and they feel like they're seen and heard, I mean, there's just something that vibrance just like pours through. And I think that's how our body begins to respond. And then over time, there's not a disconnect between the neck down and the head. It just starts flowing. And then the head speaks to the heart, and the heart speaks to the head, and the gut intuition speaks to the heart. And it all just starts flowing together. And it's through that space of connectedness that we make our wisest decisions. We really can look at the whole picture more clearly and define what patterns are in alignment and which ones are not, how we're living our values and our purpose and driving it forward, and what areas with deepest compassion we need to let go and release.
I'm going to take this and I'm going to layer a different metaphor on top of this, maybe for folks who are like, oh my gosh, this is pretty woo-woo here. Where are we going? Like, magic in the room has gotten real magical. This is essentially, to me, like a different KPI, right? KPI, key performance indicator, right? Like if you go and look at measure what matters, right? This whole concept of like what we pay attention to directs our activity. When we say something like embodiment, to me, it's like, am I paying attention to this performance indicator for me as a human being, this person who's out there trying to get stuff done? I've got a purpose. I've got a direction I'm going. Am I paying attention to all the gauges of my vehicle?
Yes. Yes, that's exactly.
Yeah. And so I think for a lot of us who grew up, here in the US, that gauge of our body and how we're feeling and where we're going, and like we haven't learned to read it. We haven't learned to look at it. We kind of forget that it's there. And so, I think when we talk about well-being and we talk about embodiment or mindfulness as a tool to maximize our well-being, which is about sustainability and maximizing our input, it really is like, can we read this other page of our KPIs or this other gauge of where we're going and how we're doing? And I would just encourage everyone listening, like if this isn't a gauge that you're used to glancing at, like just start doing it, like start practicing it. If there's the check engine light that comes on in the car, like we know that bad things happen if we ignore it. And I'll say for me as kind of the, driven, make my kids not take lunch breaks until they're done with their thing guy, right? Which says way more about me than it does about them. like it's important to know when the check engine light comes on, because I will just push through it if I'm not paying attention. And bad things happen in the same way that we, throw a rod or blow a gasket or whatever on the vehicle if the oil gets too low. If I'm not checking that and paying attention, like I will crash and burn. And I mean, Nicole and Hannah have both been a part of that, right? They've seen me when I've crashed and burned. And so to me, this is a performance issue, and I have to be able to stay on top of it. So, yeah, just wanted to provide that commentary, for what Nicole's sharing, and like practically the outcomes are really helpful if we want to have sustained impact.
And I know we're getting to the point where, we need to wrap up this conversation, but I love that contrast, Luke, that you just shared, right? Because this isn't about being soft and about being weak or not achieving, right? One of my favorite ultra runners that I follow, Sally McRae, wrote a book called Choose Strong. And I mean, she's one of the most powerful athletes I know of. And she's training for, she's running 200-mile races, 4 of them actually in a year. And I mean, there is some extreme, like she has a higher pain tolerance than anyone I know, and will move through all kinds of pain and almost like an inhuman, like pressure on her body. And yet, as a professional athlete, she's constantly monitoring what does her body need and how does she fuel up and how does she take it off season, right? For resilience to happen, we have to have both resistance and recovery. And are we paying attention to that gauge when it's time to fuel up or power down, and just being responsive to that? So that's a really, for me, just a big takeaway from this whole conversation.
Yeah, I remember, I guess it was a couple of years ago, I was speaking to someone and he said, Nicole, I just don't have a week to go sit, at the top of the Himalayas in meditation. And it just reminded me that that's not self-care either. Like we practice things, we practice these practices so that we can go out into the world with our tools or with our shoes on. Sometimes Renee has talked about meditation being like walking outside on the Texas asphalt in the summer. And, you can only think of how painful that is. Like you're running around bouncing, versus when you meditate, it's like putting on your shoes so that when you go outside, you're calm and you're ready to go, and you have layers of protection, and you can go out into the world prepared for the day.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great message to end on. Like, how are we prepared to go out there and serve the people that we love and have an impact? And for folks listening, I just like, this conversation can go as deep as you want to take it. You can go way, way deep like Nicole. You can stay 1 foot in and 1 foot out like me, right? But do what's best for you and move forward knowing yourself, making intentional choice about yourself, and discerning how can you have a sustained impact and lead and make this world a better one than what you found when you came into it, which is what we care about and what we love about having Nicole on our team, because she wants and believes the same thing. So thanks so much for the time today, Nicole. If people want to find you, how would they find you?
Purpose and Performance Group. That's www.purposeandperformancegroup.com. I am in Casey at purposeandperformancegroup.com. I am on Instagram and Facebook, Nicole Miller Casey. Instagram, I am Nicole Casey.
Awesome. Well, yeah, you can find us all those places that Nicole mentioned. purposeandperformancegroup.com, and I am going to read us out. So Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, wherever he is, Hannah Broderud, and Luke Freeman. It's produced by Ben West, social media management by Emma Holland and Maggie King Robinson. Our theme music is by Evan Grimm. You can find his music on Apple Music. This episode was recorded remotely from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Big Sky, Montana, and Boise, Idaho. Some pretty cool places. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. Find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. You can find previous episodes and download the reflection guide for well-being at magicintheroom.com.